Hello everyone and welcome to another video, and also welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm coming back to you with another books and baking sort of video. I know I said I would make this like a regular segment, but the last one was probably over a year ago, so that's how that's going. Anyway, I went out on Instagram and on YouTube to ask you guys what your favorite movies are so that I could recommend you a whole bunch of books, and I was so inundated with like people submitting their favorite movies, so thank you so much to everyone. I will just say that the community around this channel have an excellent taste in movies. There were so many really good movies that you guys suggested. Today we are making lemon and poppy seed muffins because I know how to make that, and that's pretty easy. Every time I bake and I film it, it gets a little bit chaotic. I am making this with gluten-free flour today, which I haven't done before. Okay, so kicking it off with the very first one, Parasite. Oh, it's such a good movie. The book I want to recommend for Parasite is Pachinko. The thing that I think is really beautiful about Parasite as a movie is that the way it examines society is so unflinchingly honest and impactful and brilliant. The way Pachinko examines society and looks at the societal structures that impact particularly this family of Korean people who live in Japan, I think there are a lot of parallels there. And while Pachinko is set in Japan based around a Korean family, while Parasite is set in Korea based around Korean families, I think the impactful way that these two look at society and examine society is quite similar. This book will rip your heart out. It's very sad. I recommend it so much. What is the first step of this? The 2 cups of flour. Oh, shit. Okay, given how much just fell in, I'm gonna say that's about 2 cups. So many people put in Studio Ghibli, like so many different Studio Ghibli movies. I've realized how many of you like the film Whisper of the Heart, and I wonder if this is a kind of awkward time for me to say I've never watched that movie before. Clearly, lots and lots of you really love it, so I need to give it a go. I will, however, give a recommendation for my favorite Ghibli movie, which is Howl's Moving Castle. My recommendation for that one is pretty much anything else by Diana Wynne Jones. My favorite other book by her is Charmed Life by Diana Wynne Jones, obviously. This is also a really beautifully constructed world. It has a very similar vibe to Howl's Moving Castle. So the magic systems, the world building, all of that kind of stuff is very similar. If you haven't read Howl's Moving Castle, the book, I definitely recommend checking it out because it's amazing. But otherwise, I recommend any of like the wizardy books by Diana Wynne Jones, like the Crestomancy series and stuff like that. And then for anyone who said Ghibli generally, I want to recommend this book, which is Miyazaki World by Susan Napier. This is a non-fiction book about the films of Hayao Miyazaki specifically. This is a really wonderful analysis on all of Miyazaki's different films, his influences and his experiences through life and stuff like that. So if you love Studio Ghibli and you want a bit more of a background on one of the key directors for Studio Ghibli, I definitely recommend this one. I do want to do a video eventually of books to read if you love Studio Ghibli, but there are a few more books I want to read which I think will go on that list before I make that video. Sugar, poppy seeds, right. 3/4 cup of granulated sugar. Okay, that's quite a lot, so I'm probably gonna do ½ cup of sugar just to make it like a little bit less sugary. Moulin Rouge / The Greatest Showman. I love Moulin Rouge. That is such a good movie. I don't know if I put it on my favorite movies list, but it is one of my favorite movies. I really love Moulin Rouge. Have not seen The Greatest Showman, but I can guess the sort of vibe you're going for with that one. I want to recommend 2 books to you guys, which are Knights of the Circus by Angela Carter and The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. Despite having almost an identical name, a very different books. Knights of the Circus I've talked about a bit recently is a book by Angela Carter about a young woman named Feathers, and it's about this woman who was born with wings on her back, and so she becomes an aerialist with these massive wings. And so it's like a gothic magical realism, really cool, beautifully written story. The Night Circus, which I didn't love as much but is still a really good book, is this very like atmospheric circus story, which I think you'll really love if you like world building and if you want a really like dreamlike setting. Very whimsical, very immersive to read, and I think you'll really like if you like Moulin Rouge and The Greatest Showman. Dead Poets Society. Oh, I have a good one for this. I want to recommend Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is a wonderful book about a person who is stuck in a house that contains the ocean. The house is very labyrinthine. There's only one other person in this sort of fantastical house whose name is the Other, and the Other is searching for a great and unknown truth. And then the sort of like mystery arises as the main character, whose name is Piranesi, realizes that maybe there is another person in this house. Very scholarly, there's lots of like lists of citations and stuff like that. Probably my favorite dark academia type book. I did also read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell recently, which is by the same author, which is also a very good one, which I do also recommend. 113 grams of butter. Okay, for some of these, I think I'm gonna have to speed through these recommendations because I have so many books I want to recommend to you guys. Lots and lots of people asked for recommendations based on the film Pride and Prejudice, like the Keira Knightley one. I love that movie. It's a very good movie. And also Little Women, both the like more recent one with Saoirse Ronan in it and the like older one as well. I've read quite a few classics, but there's not heaps of classics that I absolutely adore in the same vein as Little Women or Pride and Prejudice. That's slightly too much butter, but never mind. Okay, I don't know if you guys can hear me over the microwave. Two of my favorite classics are Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and this is Pride and Prejudice, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And while these two have a very different vibe to Little Women or Pride and Prejudice, because these two books are actually gothic, they are written around a similar time frame, and I absolutely love them to pieces. So if you're looking for more of a period piece, Frankenstein was the book that birthed the science fiction genre. It's a very influential book about a man named Victor Frankenstein who creates an unnamed creature, and then everything goes wrong. And then Jane Eyre is about a young woman who has a very unfortunate childhood and then becomes a governess in a creepy house with this very rich man who has a lot of secrets, and it's a good creepy gothic time. Someone said Saw. The thing is that I cannot watch horror movies. I absolutely cannot. I watched Wolf Creek when I was like 12, and that's a very influential Australian horror movie. Quite intense. Like, you know, 12-year-olds should be watching that film, and I was so affected by that film. I still can't really go into the outback because it kind of terrifies me now. When I was 14, I watched Paranormal Activity. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but I'm a chronic sleepwalker. Like, I have a consistent problem with sleepwalking, and there was a period of time when I was a teenager, because of watching Paranormal Activity, that I used to wake up standing in the middle of my room, so that I don't go very well with horror movies. However, if you're looking for grotesque violence, I can recommend The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami, which I've spoken about recently, but that book is a beautiful magical realism book set in Tokyo that has a very winding, all over the place sort of plot. But there is a scene in that book that is so grotesquely violent that I felt ill for like 2 days. So if that's what you're looking for, then that is the type of book I would recommend for you. Okay, that's a really good movie. I love the soundtrack. I want to recommend to you To Android's Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, which is a very well-known influential sci-fi book. This is the book that inspired Blade Runner. And also I want to recommend Clara and the Sun. So these two books are about androids. So To Android's Dream of Electric Sheep was written in 1969 and is about a like futuristic society which is very dystopian, in which there is a bounty hunter who's trying to find these very human looking androids. Clara and the Sun is a story told from the perspective of an android who exists to basically be an artificial friend to this young girl. It's about her life. Her is a wonderful movie about a man who falls in love with his operating system. And so I think these two books are really good if you're interested in technology and human relationships with technology as well. The Batman trilogy, I would recommend to you Macbeth by William Shakespeare. I wrote an essay in year 11 comparing The Dark Knight to Macbeth, because there's a lot of crossovers with the key themes of the story and the characters being quite similar. So that might be a bit of a weird recommendation, but those two are really quite thematically linked. I love anything by Christopher Nolan. Oh, Pan's Labyrinth. This is such a good movie. I love this movie. Just went straight to the Angela Carter shelf. Okay, I'd recommend to you the short story collection The Bloody Chamber, because these are retellings of fairy tales that are really dark and interesting and beautifully written. The Magic Toy Shop, which is a bit more of a realistic text, but this is like an examination of girlhood and the coming of age of the main character, which is also a key theme in Pan's Labyrinth. And then if you just want a good dark fantasy sort of story about a child in a, you know, scary situation, I recommend The Ocean at the End of the Lane. So these are the three books I want to recommend if you love Pan's Labyrinth. Let's get zesting on these lemons. We need 2 tablespoons. That's 1. Okay, we might have to zest both lemons. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Oh, I have two books I want to recommend for this. We have The Midnight Library by Matt Haig and The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Both of these books we read for our book club over on Patreon, which is why they're covered in little tabs from me analysing them. The Midnight Library is a book that is essentially about a young woman getting the chance to live out all the different versions of her life that she could have lived. She goes to the Midnight Library, which is basically the spot between sort of life and death. It's kind of like a limbo situation. So I also want to recommend this book. Addie LaRue is a book about a young woman who makes a deal with the devil to live forever. However, she is cursed to be forgotten by everyone she meets. Okay, Lord of the Rings, a very good one. A very, very good film franchise. Thank you to everyone who said Lord of the Rings. It gives me the opportunity to talk about this book, which is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This book is such a wonderful story for anyone who wants immersive high fantasy that's beautifully woven, that has a really wonderfully crafted world, and that has a lot of attention to detail. So I think the thing that stands out with Tolkien is his amazing world building, the languages that he built. I love this story. It is basically a retelling of the tale of George and the Dragon. There's a lot of Old English folklore in here, which is great because Lord of the Rings was Tolkien's attempt to create a new mythos for England. This book also is good because there's women in it. So I'm pretty sure from memory the juice of like a lemon and a half will do well because we need the other half for the glazy icing thing. I didn't even bother preheating the oven because it heats up this room so much. It's very dark, I'm sorry. And then we mix in the big mixture. It goes. Ratatouille, okay, I'm so happy that a few people said Ratatouille. I want to recommend The Traveling Cat Chronicle by Hiro Arikawa because that book is also told from the perspective of an animal. So The Traveling Cat Chronicle is obviously told from the perspective of a cat. It is about a cat whose owner is going on a road trip across Japan, and it's basically the cat narrating what's happening. I loved it. I bawled my eyes out. It's a good tear-jerking book. Do not overmix, I may have just done that. Kimi no Nawa. I want to recommend for this one Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, which is about people who can time travel in this cafe based in Tokyo. However, there's a lot of very specific rules about the time traveling. You have to be sitting in a specific seat. There's only certain times of a day where you can actually go and sit in that seat. You have to finish your time traveling visit before the coffee gets cold, otherwise terrible stuff happens. Really beautiful, short, contemporary Japanese literature text. Atonement, I want to recommend All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr, also a World War II book. I mean, obviously, if you like the film Atonement, I recommend you go and check out the book by Ian McEwan, which is also called Atonement. This is a really wonderful, tear-jerking book, which was the winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 2015. And this is a story about two kids who are sort of caught up in World War II. So we have Marie Laure, who is a young girl living in Paris at the beginning of the story. She is blind, and then we also have the other character whose name is Werner, who is living in Germany, and he is an orphan. We kind of go back and forth between these like non-chronological tiny snippets of their lives, and it's so beautifully interwoven. The imagery is lovely in this book, and if you want a World War II story which is quite a tearjerker, which is beautifully written, I definitely recommend All the Light We Cannot See. Anastasia, I loved that movie so much when I was little. Like that, I watched it to death. If you're wanting a book set in like a Northern European, Russian-esque location, which is like fantastical, there's royalty, there's princesses and stuff like that, I'd recommend Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. And this one is a retelling essentially of the tale of Rumpelstiltskin. We have three primary point of view characters. Miriam, who is the daughter of a moneylender, lender is the daughter of a moneylender. And then we also have Irena, who is betrothed to the Tsar of this land. There's a whole bit at the bottom that wasn't mixed properly. And nickels. Please don't hit the leg of the tripod. If I was organized, I probably would have run the dishwasher before starting this video, but I didn't do that. The glaze is supposed to be made up of 1 cup of powdered sugar and 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. That is a lot of sugar. Okay, so let's put in about a half cup. I don't want to drown them in this. We want a nice little tangy surprise on top. That makes it sound weird. Alright, let's start with that. I think that's good. That looks very glazy. I think. Sweeney Todd. This is a movie I also watched a bit too young, probably. I think I watched this when I was also 12. I watched the stage show of this a few weeks ago. A friend of mine got tickets to it, and so we went and saw State Opera put on Sweeney Todd, and it was amazing. They did a really good job. For this book, for this film, I want to recommend A Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is a book which is another Gothic literature book. All of my favorite classics are Gothic. Again, I don't really read a lot of thrillers or horror or books about demon barbers cutting people up. However, this book is a little bit darker. It is about a young man who one day gets very, very sad because he realizes that he will age and he will not be lovely forever, and he is getting his portrait painted by this painter, and he wishes that the portrait could age and he could stay lovely forever. As Dorian Gray becomes more and more lost, his portrait gets more and more haggard as he commits all of these sins. So beautifully written. And if you're looking for something a bit older and darker, I would recommend this book. Lost in Translation. Okay, so this film is like, ugh. Okay, so Spike Jonze, who made the movie Her, and Sofia Coppola, who made Lost in Translation, were married. Sofia Coppola made Lost in Translation. It was supposed to kind of be about like the demise of their relationship, and then when Spike Jonze made Her, that was his like response to that film. So these films are like really interesting because they're thematically linked. However, the book I'm recommending is very, very different for Lost in Translation because I'm actually recommending Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. Lost in Translation is a beautiful film set in Japan. There are some parts of that movie that I don't like very much, from the perspective of like kind of depicting Japan as just being really, really weird and wacky, and like some little sections of it feel a bit like kind of ethnocentric to me. So if you want something that's set in Japan that is quite introspective and a little bit sad and it's gonna leave you feeling a little bit dead inside, I would recommend Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. This is a story about a man who is remembering his youth, pretty much. He's remembering his time at university during the 60s where there was like a lot of student protests. There are some really sad things that happened to his friends. He remembers the relationships that he formed around this time. He was sort of discovering who he was as a person. The imagery in this book is so stunning. The way Haruki Murakami depicts Tokyo and the back streets of Tokyo is just one of my favorite things in the world, and I love it very, very much. Again, I think they'll be a little bit different because they're gluten-free flour today. If anyone wants any context as to why I've suddenly started baking with gluten-free flour, I'm like trying to work out what I'm intolerant to. Let's create a little bit of space where we can put the muffins. I think they're cooked. So that is what it looks like. A little bit burnt on the edges, but that's okay. The glaze is good because it's made with lemon juice, so it's like super tangy. Anything by Tim Burton. So I would recommend to you Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman or Coraline, also by Neil Gaiman. Very whimsical, cute, gothic, dark. I love these books. I've spoken about them to death. Like so many of you guys said 500 Days of Summer, which is my favorite film of all time. There are no books that I have that I could recommend based on that movie that have the same vibe or have the same like dynamic with the characters or tell, you know, the same sort of story that 500 Days of Summer is trying to tell, which is like my favorite part of the movie is the fundamental story. I think that's it for all of the movies I'm going to be able to recommend. I am actually going to eat this now, so let's see how this goes. Okay, it was pretty good. Okay, yeah, no, that definitely could use some more time in the oven. Oh my god. So not disastrous, but just like a little bit too gooey in the center. And we'll chuck those in the oven for like a few more minutes, but this is honestly fine to eat. I've already taken a big bite out of it anyway. I hope you guys enjoyed this like mildly messy baking and book recommendations video. Please let me know if you want to see more videos like this. An enormous thank you to everyone over on Patreon for supporting this channel and for making these videos possible. Take care guys, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.